But it's about democracy, too. I mean, when you have an election cycle, you have to deliver the goods, at least at a certain point, or make promises that you can't keep, okay? And this is one of the problems that the industrialized West has, because it has to give the pretense of making promises and entitlements on a very short, limited basis. But when you have India, Brazil, China, Russia, they think very long term. I mean, everyone in Russia talks about Putin's 2025 project, okay? And slowly but surely, they're working away at it. But there's a longer vision, and it's not tied to the election cycle. How much of the problems in the economy in the West is tied to an election cycle?
The more the state provides material goods, and the more that it's seen that to be that, then inevitably more it will fall prey to election cycles. But I want to use what's been said about higher education and other social goods provided by the state to illustrate what to me seems to be a very disconcerting fact. As we know, in Britain, for instance, higher education is now no longer free. When I was a student, it was free. This is one of the many examples, property is another one, which show that the generations are getting poorer. We are on a downward slope in spite of all the propaganda about how free trade makes anybody richer. I don't have figures, but it is my firm conviction that there is nobody, or very few people, who are richer now than their parents. The property prices have been driven up by monetarily generated inflation and by monetary instability generally. And the accumulation of debt is obviously a taxation in one form or another on future generations to the benefit of present ones. This is one of the big issues of today, and it ties into what you asked about long-termism. One of the things that's very interesting is if we look at the emerging market world, you have this expansion of middle classes, huge middle classes right now. But we have in the West, and particularly in the United States and the Eurozone, we see the middle class being under enormous assault. And the income disparity that we see, inequality that is growing now. I mean, to echo what John just said there, I mean, very few people now will say they think they will do better than their parents.
I think what's happening is that we're seeing a polarization, not just between the rich and the poor in a sort of dualistic sense, but we're seeing essentially a consolidation of the underclass, and I don't like using the word, but it is an underclass. We're seeing a middle class that's constantly being squeezed for all the reasons that John said, and we're seeing a tiny, tiny upper class, I'm not using this in any social sense, but really in an economic one, that is getting much, much richer than anyone ever before, where, you know, their wealth is going up by a factor of 10 or 100 or more. And, you know, but China has a similar problem because it has now got the fastest rate, or it's got the fastest growth of billionaires. You know, soon London property prices will be pushed up in that segment by
Adrian,
Chinese
you still have a growing middle class simultaneously.
You do as well, sure, but the fact is,
yes,
the kind of capitalism that we're dealing with does polarize society, even in a very different context. So yes, you're absolutely right about the middle class in China, but China will also experience, and is already experiencing, social strife and conflict because of this polarization. It takes on different forms, but capitalism always works at it. It works through dispossession, through expropriation, and it does not trickle down to the masses. That's a great myth, which I hope the last 3 or 4 or 5 years
another myth that I
shown
come
to be
across,
wrong.
Alan, if I can go to you, is that, you know, a lot of people say the middle class, say, get the state off my back, but maybe in the industrialized West, it's the state that can save the middle class.
Actually, I think the fourth myth is that the middle class exists. There are two divisions you need. One is between the financial guys and the corporate guys, and I'm happy if the corporate guys invest. The financial guys are not going to, so if the corporate guys don't invest, the public's going to have to come in, which is what's happening now. But the other thing is that there's property owners and non-property owners. And I was amazed to discover when I got to the United States that everybody who's in a trade union is considered middle class. You just mean guys with jobs. That's what you mean.
Wow, that's a terrible litmus test.
Or family capital or capital gains or whatever. You just mean people who make money from money and people who make money from work. Most of these middle class people make money from work, and they should cast their lot in with the poorer people who make their money from work.
Are we getting to a point where being employed means middle class?
Well, I once, an antique dealer I know in Bath once said very pithily that for him working class meant people who didn't want to work.
Well, I was in Argentina when it collapsed, and I would put it the other way around. When you get a crisis, the middle class becomes the people who have to work. And they stop having this illusion that they can become rich like everybody else and suddenly realize, hey, we're just like the poor guy down the street that I used to pass by. They're all in the same boat. When they realize that, then you'll get democracy back, then you'll get equality back. Because once people think we're all in the same boat, then they start thinking we should all have the same rights. except the guys who are taking it away from us.
And that's precisely where we need much more, or many more risk and profit sharing arrangements, so that you don't have a disconnect between those who take risk and those who suffer the consequences. Because what we're essentially dealing with is a system that has privatized profit, nationalized losses, and socialized risk. And that is the system we're still in, 3 or 4 years after the onset of the crisis.
Well, that sounds like socialism for the rich and capitalism for the poor.
Exactly. And in some ways, what we really need is for people to share risk and profit, so that if things go well, everyone benefits. And the way to do this is through property, is through various forms of property, not just individual property, but also forms of communal property. Housing associations are a great example of this. That's where you share risk and profit. Everyone is better off if you work together. On your own, you could never, for example, negotiate better energy deals with the big companies. You could only do it as a small body. And we could have this across the economy.
And last word. Go.
And mutualized banks.
Yes, exactly.
My money is with a credit union. In Manitoba, the prairies have them, right? You give them their money, they keep it, and they lend it to other people like you.
Shocking.
Is what the economist Victoria Chick, that great Keynesian called plain vanilla.
It sounds like we just have to be old-fashioned here. Thank you, gentlemen, for discussing this, and stay with RT.